What is going on, everybody? Welcome back here to the channel. I'm Sean Davis. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe here to the channel. Joining me today to break down some Lakers basketball is none other than senior NBA reporter for The Athletic, covering the Lakers, and host of the Jovan Buha podcast. I'm going to do that every single time I have you on as a guest for any of my channels. Best introduction in the game right here, my guy Jovan. Thanks so much for hopping on with me, bro. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me on. I can't really top that intro.
Let's dive in here. So this is kind of our first time talking since the preseason episode that I had you on my Sports Headlines channel for this Lakers team. And this is even like on the list, but I do want to ask you this before we really get into the gritty of things here. What's kind of been the thing that surprised you the most from our preseason conversation?
I would say that the biggest surprise has been Cam Reddish. I did not have Cam Reddish starting by game 9 on my Lakers bingo card. I thought that it was likely going to go this way in terms of eventually having to split up the Austin D'Lo backcourt. I think it would have probably just been easier to split it up to start the season, but they wanted to give this starting lineup that went 18-6 to close the regular season last year a chance. And obviously they were a good lineup last year. They've been largely a good lineup this year. But I thought it would be Gabe Vincent or Max Christie in that starting spot next to Austin Reeves, not Cam Reddish. So I would say among all of the different things that have happened, for the Lakers through these first 9 games, that Cam Reddish, getting back into the starting lineup and playing really well. Like he has played, he earned that spot. He had, I think, before he returned to the starting lineup, and then D'Lo obviously had a big game off the bench. I thought those were the two best bench performances of the season in consecutive games from Cam Reddish. So he deserved it, but I did not have that on my there was, it came out of nowhere, right? Like I think we most people projected him outside of the rotation. He was not in the rotation. He played garbage time in Cleveland. Then the next game didn't play at all, and then all of a sudden in Detroit gets an opportunity, makes the most of it. So Cam Reddish has been the biggest surprise for me.
Yeah, shout out to Cam Reddish. Another thing that's not necessarily on the agenda, but you did touch on it. It is the D'Lo benching. One, I think the reaction has been completely different to what like it was last season when they made the switch. It wasn't necessarily benching D'Lo; they benched Austin. Has there been anything noticeable like within the team that is making this more well received than it did last season when Darvin did decide to bench Austin, put Cam Reddish in the starting 5? I think Torian was in there too. Is there anything like different, or is it more so as the message is received differently because it's JJ as opposed to Darvin?
I think it's more the latter. I also think this group has been together a bit longer. Last year, there were some of the guys from the Western Conference Finals group, obviously carrying over, but I think now this group, I mean, D'Lo's been on the team for a year and a half. Vando's been on the team for a year and a half, and across parts of 3 seasons now. Rui, same thing. And then a lot of the bench guys were on the team last season. So I think that kind of helps things. I think JJ being such a direct communicator, you know where you stand with JJ at all times. You know what your role is, you know what the expectations are, you know what shifts in the game you're going to play in. So JJ has that all planned out to a T, and he really tries to stick to it. And you can start to see like guys will pop off the bench at various points when they know they're about to check in, and it's just because he has it so meticulously planned. And obviously he's made some changes throughout the season, so it's not like it's the same game to game, but guys know when they're going to be playing. So I think that helps. But I also just think when you go through a skid the way that they went through on that 1-4 road trip, and teams were able to attack the backcourt, attack them in transition, and if you have like AD's often the at least 80s the guy that's crashing. He's the guy that's around the rim. And sometimes you have Rui corner crashing. And we know LeBron can be a threat in transition, but that isn't always a strength in his game in terms of getting back. So a lot of times it's Austin and D'Lo, and that's where teams have been thriving in transition, scoring on those guys, getting to the rim, creating good looks, etc. So it was clear that they needed a defensive, stopper or perimeter threat defensively in that starting group to alleviate the pressure both on Rui and Austin. And I think it was just a matter of which guy was going to fill it. And I think up until Cam Reddish emerged randomly off the bench, I think it was probably going to be Gabe Vincent, although obviously he has not been playing very well either. So I think the Lakers were kind of hoping for someone to separate from the pack. Cam Reddish gets an opportunity, he does that, and then now he's a starter. So I think it was logically kind of made more sense this time around. I know Austin wasn't playing well last year, but that was still a group that the Lakers, they had just been talking about Austin as a future All-Star. He's been a guy they've refused to include in trades. And that one, I think, didn't sit right with people because I think a lot of people internally were like, why is Austin the guy going to the bench? This is our third best player. This time around, I think it made a little bit more sense within the context of like why they were struggling and just balancing both the bench and the starting lineup.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation that you and I had back in the preseason, which was now again, what did we expect it to be Cam Reddish? No, but the conversation being they're gonna kind of run back into the same wall, which is as good as we like Austin and D'Lo individually, the best thing for this team probably is to split them up. And I thought it became even more apparent when we kind of saw how D'Lo was being utilized offensively, where he was the clear-cut fourth option, and kind of depending on the night and if Rui was playing well or not, he at times would be the fifth option and kind of relegated to being a spacer. So letting him go to the bench and be the best six man in the league, probably D'Lo as the six man is is it him or Naz Reid? You know what I'm saying? Like it's for best six man scorer and just player off the bench. Again, Cam Reddish came out of nowhere. It sucks that Max and Gabe have not played well, which kind of leads me into one of the things we do actually have on the agenda, which is kind of your biggest concern up to this point. This team's 5-4. There was a lot of celebration, dare I say, and praise for this team once they started off 3-0. And rightfully so, right? You got some big wins. You beat the Kings, which was like has never happened, at least in a while. You get the big opening night win against the Timberwolves. You beat the Suns once out of the two games you play them in. Then you had the awful road trip. Now you're sitting at 5-4 after a home Sixers win. What would be your biggest concern through 9 games or so to start the season off?
So I have two, and they're equally concerning to me. It's been the defense overall, though I think we can specifically look at the transition defense as just being horrible. And then the second thing would be the overall bench play and production. I don't think they're 29th in bench scoring, which I think is problematic, but it's not just been the raw scoring, because I do think with that starting lineup and now even moving D'Lo to the bench, that balances things out a bit. But it's just been Gabe Vincent and Max Christie have been essentially unplayable offensively because of the way that they've been operating, and also just the lack of shot making, poor shooting. But also I would even throw in Dalton Knecht. I feel like Dalton Knecht, because he's a rookie and because he did have the garbage time explosion in Cleveland, and he obviously had the big preseason game against Phoenix. But Dalton Knecht is kind of flown under the radar in terms of his shooting struggles. Like, he has not been the shot maker, floor spacer that the Lakers have wanted or needed him to be up to this point. So I would say those three really struggling just to do basic things like hit open threes and just sort of be those spacers for the rest of the higher usage guys around both LeBron and AD, but also Austin, D'Lo, Rui, etc. So I would say those guys not making shots and that really compromising where the Lakers were the starting lineup has actually been pretty good. It's really just been once you start trickling in. Gabe Vincent is last in box plus minus. He's last in basketball B-ball indexes, LeBron metric. Like he's been arguably
He's dead last.
he is. He's been arguably the worst player in the NBA from like a advanced stat perspective. I wouldn't say he's been that level bad, but he's been a harmful player for stretches for sure. Max Christie, similar percentages with him. Dalton Knecht's been a little bit better, but part of that was also from that garbage time in the fourth quarter against Cleveland. So if you take that away, Dalton Knecht's shooting percentages look much more in line with Gabe and Max. So like they need at least one of those three guys, and Max seems to be out of the rotation now, so maybe he's not even in this conversation. But between Gabe and Dalton, they need one of those guys to pop and be at least like a league average 3-point shooter who can just be that safety valve of kick out passes or swings, whatever. Like they need to be able to hit shots and keep a defense honest. So that's the second thing. But the defense, I think, is maybe that's more concerning because I don't really know how they fix it. Like adding Jared Vanderbilt will help, and I think adding Cam Reddish has helped. But ultimately, this is a group that is relatively limited in terms of their athleticism, their foot speed. They're at a constant disadvantage against. Like I thought Cleveland. I mean, Cleveland's 11-0 right now, so they look great against everybody.
Yeah.
But they're a particularly tough one because their front court can match LA's front court in terms of size and length, but then they got the foot speed on the perimeter. And like when you could do that against the Lakers, when you could kind of neutralize the front court and then your back court's quicker than theirs, that's where the Lakers, like even Detroit was a lesser version of that. So the Lakers, I think the bench stuff, I think will regress positively to some extent, though I also think maybe we'll have lower expectations overall for like the depth of this group and them needing to solve some of that. But the transition defense and the defense overall, if they're a bottom 10 defense, I think it's going to be really tough for this group to exceed or at least meet the expectations that I think the fan base had of like being a top 5 or 6 seed, being able to win a round or two potentially. Like it's just tough to do that if your defense is that bad.
Yeah. The funny thing about kind of the start of the season and the ultra high highs of like the fan base after the first 3 games and then the so lows after that road trip. And I put a tweet out even kind of saying like Laker fans are like at and then Lakers, not like specifically tagging the Lakers. But fans, dude, calm down. And that tweet got such a negative reaction. But the point was, from my perspective, at least, very few things to the first like 10 games or 9 games of the season really surprised me, good and bad. And the reason why I say that is there's a couple of specific things. Like I do think the defense is obviously a concern, and I'm glad you touched on it. The bench, I was kind of on the lower end, but I thought, hey, Max, Dalton, you get Vando back at some point. Okay, maybe that's enough, but it's probably been worse, I think, anybody's anticipated. But you take that out of the equation, a lot of the problems this Lakers team had or is currently dealing with are the same problems this team's had for the better portion of the last like 12 months or so, which is kind of why I said, like, dude, relax. This is the same team. The one thing I am kind of curious to see, and I'm not even really ready to call this a concern, is do the Lakers, are they able to get back to consistently winning the possession war, which JJ has super emphasized heading into the season? They were at one point, I want to say 8th in offensive rebounding percentage. Now they've dialed back to 20th in offensive rebound percentage. If you look at their turnover percentage, they're still kind of right on par to where they've been over the past few years, or 8th in turnover percentage. But the offensive rebounding battle, like, would like to see them really dial back in on that and being extra aggressive on the boards. I think it was opening night where Austin had 4 or 5 offensive rebounds, just going in there like a madman. And I do want to give you this like stat too. You were talking about like the stars been really, really good, and it's really when you start mixing and matching. The Lakers per clean the glass in terms of their net rating or whatever, so minus 1.8 as a team overall. Their starters for the bulk of the season, I know they made the change: D'Lo, Austin, Rui, Braun, AD, plus 7.7. Their new starting
which is
five,
really good. That's
which
a
is really
good.
good, and over 200 possessions. So that's a pretty good sample size. This one, lesser sample size, but 31 possessions. Austin, Cam, Rui, Braun AD, 31 possessions, plus 32.3. That's awesome. But I'm really only saying those things to overemphasize the point that this team has not been good whatsoever once you get away from those two starting lineups, because I mean those two groups have such positive net ratings as a group, and overall as a team they're still in the negative somehow. That just goes on to your point.
Yeah, I mean that's where like I was probably a little higher than most on the Lakers bench and their depth, but it's been like so detrimental that I've seen it too. It's funny because I constantly get the comments or the tweets of like, we got to bench Gabe, we got to bench Max, we got to bench Jackson, and it's like at some point you run out of guys to play, and I think they've kind of had like they've really struggled to even have like 7 productive like it's typically been the starters have been productive, although I think Rui's tailed off a little bit from his hot start, and then D'Lo's been a little up and down, but I think the top 3 guys have largely been consistent. Then occasionally they've had a solid bench performance, but otherwise it's really been like they only have like 6 playable guys on most nights. And now I think it's a little bit better with Cam popping. Jackson, I think, has been playing better recently. And then Dalton, Gabe, and Max, I think are still kind of figuring out their roles and getting into a rhythm. But I think that like they could use Jared Vanderbilt. Let's just say that, right? And I do think, I wonder now with this shift, and JJ said it's a fluid starting lineup shift, so he's not committed to D'Lo permanently being on the bench. He's not committed to this starting lineup moving forward. I wonder if the Lakers get a little funky and just slide Jared Vanderbilt into that Cam Reddish spot once he
talked about that
is
in the summer.
fully back. And it's a big lineup, right? You're starting Austin, who's 6'5", and you don't really have a traditional second guard out there. It's basically 3 big wings with AD and Austin, but I like that. And you can switch 2 through 5 in that lineup, and all of those guys can, like, there will be some centers that could punish a Vando or a Rui or even a LeBron, but for the most part, against most teams, you can switch 2 through 5, and then I think you'd be a little bit more selective with Austin, who you're switching him onto. But I like that, because then offensively, I mean, Vando's just basically a better version of Cam. I think the one thing Cam could do better than him is shoot, and that is an important aspect for sure. But in terms of rebounding, I even would say ball handling and playmaking, and just that energy, defense, like Vando is a superior player to Cam. So I think it's kind of like, he's almost a placeholder right now, because I don't think you want to start Cam Reddish like long term if we're in game 50, game 55. But that player archetype has been useful. I think it made sense that they had to split that up. And then now I wonder if you just throw Vando in there and you get a little funky, but I kind of like you're starting 5 of your 6 best players, then D'Lo's the 6th man, and I think that rotation makes a bit more sense.
This is why it's so important, I think, for a Dalton to figure it out. Cam, this finally is for real, and this is what Cam Reddish is. Not like a quick flash and a flash in the pan and it's kind of gone. No, this is Cam. You get Vando back, and Vando doesn't have this 3-month ramp up, and then you get good Vando, and then he gets hurt again. Because I think the Thunder is the best team in the league, for example, right? But what makes the Thunder so Boston, I guess, too, but I'm specifically talking about the Thunder here. What makes them so tough is they have so many different options, and they can get so fluid, I think was the word you used, with their and creative with their lineup combinations, starting lineup combinations. They literally, I feel, have a different 5th man in every lineup. Every game. It's going to be Shea. It's going to be Chet. It's going to be J-Dub. It's going to be Lou Dort. And, we have the X team on the schedule. All right, 5th starter is going to be Aaron Wiggins tonight. Next night, the Nuggets, they've started Isaiah Joe both games against the Nuggets. This team, Casey Wallace. I think that would be really, really cool for the Lakers if D'Lo is kind of consistent again. Like I said, Cam is able to find his pocket in the team. Vando comes back healthy. Dalton figures it out. And you get to a scenario where, okay, hey, Denver's on the schedule. Let's get clunky. Let's throw in Vando and see if we can slow down their offense. Or X teams on the schedule. You know what I'm trying to say? So that'll be really, really cool. I'm glad you kind of set me down on the path to get to that idea. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I thought Dalton, so that lineup against Philly was the lineup that shifted the game. What was 80 LeBron, Dalton, Austin, D'Lo, and that's an example of I mean it's almost a different fourth and fifth guy because you're removing Rui, but it just shows when and Dalton I think went 1 for 8 last game, so it wasn't even like he was making shots, but just the threat of his shooting and the different ways he could be used offensively. It is valuable to the offense, of course, even if he's not making shots, just that threat there. So that was a lineup that worked. And I think you can see so if they do go, let's just say Vando as the fifth guy, then you have those 5, but then off the bench, you have D'Lo, Dalton, Cam, and then Jackson or Christian. Maybe that's a more matchup-based situation, or maybe it's just whoever's playing better. But that, to me, that 9 looks better. Notice I did not say Gabe or Max. I think one of those guys is going to have to pop as a shooter to earn their way back into the rotation circle. But I mean, clearly Gabe, as JJ's a fan of Gabe, so maybe Gabe is has a spot in there. But I think based on merit and need, I think it ends up potentially going in that direction of those 5: D'Lo, Dalton, Cam, and then backup 5.
All right. We got to talk about one Mr. Anthony Davis, who has been dealing with a weird foot injury. They first said it was heel related, and then it's plantar fasciitis now, right?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I think he's had at least 29 points in every single game this season. He's been insane. I think he's the best half-court defensive player in the league. And then you combine that with the insane performance on the offensive end throughout the entire season. What's got to be your biggest takeaway, I think, from Anthony Davis's hot start? And hot might be a bit of an understatement describing AD's play.
Scorching, right?
Yeah.
He's on fire, literally. I would say this is the actualized version of AD that I think people have been clamoring for over the past 2-3 years. And I feel like he's been headed this way. I think people act like this is coming out of nowhere, where it's no, he closed the 2022-23 season really strong. Then that carried over into the 2023 playoffs, into the conference finals run. Then that carried over into last year, which to me was his second best season as a Laker after the championship season. And then now he's just taken it to a different level. And if you look at it from a statistical perspective, a lot of his shooting percentages are similar in terms of shots, the locations on the floor and how he's performing. It's really been a volume thing. The Lakers, JJ said at his opening press conference and all of the media he did over the past few months that we're going to make Anthony Davis the hub of our offense. And he has backed that up. And we've heard that before, right? It tends to be, there's 2 AD trends entering a season. It's always okay, the baton or the torch is going to be passed from LeBron to AD. AD is the guy, LeBron's the number 2 guy. And we see flashes of it. It never really materializes. Then the 3-point shooting is always the other one. That one hasn't happened, but that's fine. When he's playing like this, it's okay. But to me, it's just been the intentionality of the offense. Of JJ's talked about this. They don't want to go a few possessions without him getting a shot attempt, without him being in a position to score. And they've stuck to that. And they will go. Just like any offense that teams will try and take away something and they'll have to go in a different direction. But you've noticed it when it's been a couple possessions, 3 possessions, 4 possessions, JJ will call a set to get AD the ball. And then I would say that the sub thing for me has been, he's actually attempting, if you look at his average shot attempt distance, it's the closest since his rookie season. So he is playing a little bit closer to the basket, and that's, I think, helped him attempt so many free throws, because that's been the biggest thing. Is his shooting percentages have been largely the same. It's just he's getting to the free throw line way more. But the big thing to me is they're leveraging his athleticism and foot speed and getting him on the move. And it's whether it's coming off of pin downs or back screens or 3-man action, DHOs, faking the DHO, decoy actions, whatever. Like they've been getting him around the elbows, around the top of the arc, and most big men and even wings can't really stay in front of him when he's barreling down toward the rim. So I think it's been the intentionality of just increasing his usage and keeping him involved at all times when he's on the floor, but then also getting him on the move. And when AD gets on the move and he gets downhill, he's really difficult to stop, and he's either going to get to the basket and finish, or he's going to draw a foul. And that's what we've seen through these first 9 games.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the free throw usage and rate. Anthony Davis is living in the paint, like you mentioned. So far this season, 10.4. He's averaging 10.4 shot attempts at the rim per 75 possessions, which is insane. He's shooting 72% at the rim, 7.5 mid-range attempts per 75 possessions, shooting around 43% from the mid-range as well, which is great. What's dare I say scary in a good way about AD's performance so far this season is this has been his worst post-up scoring season since he's been a Laker. Dare I say by far. Every year since he's been a Laker, he's been in at least a 53rd percentile or higher in terms of post-up scoring efficiency per synergy. This season, he's in the 32nd percentile for post-up scoring, which I'm not worried about whatsoever because, I mean, this is coming off the last season, by the way, where Anthony Davis was a lights-out post-up scorer, and he's always been a really good post scorer, but last year was, I think, actually his best season as a Laker in terms of his post-up scoring ability. Yeah, 70th percentile last season, which I think is the highest since he's been a Laker. But what makes it even more fun with AD this year is kind of to your point, how they're using him. They're getting him in so many different actions and scoring opportunities. He has at least 5 different play types, offensive scoring play types, where it's at least 9% of his scoring possessions are going there. They're getting him on the roll. They're getting him on post up still, in transition, off of the cuts, in like the dunker spot, or even from the slot every once in a while. Letting him play in isolation a little bit too. So that's been, to your point, the number one thing. Like, come hell or high water, JJ said this is AD's team from, like, look, we are running everything through him. And I think if nothing else, that he has like held his word to that, and AD's been an animal all year long.
Yeah. And I will say, so you mentioned the plantar fasciitis, which is a really tough word to say.
Yeah.
That's something that I am slightly concerned with, just because that's such a nagging injury, and it's an injury that gets aggravated by running and jumping and putting pressure and weight on it. And after the game, the last game against the Sixers, we spoke with AD post game, and he said that it was bothering him during the game, and he kind of had to just play through it. And it seems to be a bit of a pain tolerance thing, but at the same time, they're going to be managing his practice workload and sort of making sure he's resting and recovering on practice days. And I just, that is something that, unfortunately, he is now dealing with, and it could end up not being a factor whatsoever. But sometimes with guys, you see when they have an injury on one side of their lower body, they start to compensate on the other side of their body, and that leads to a different type of injury, or that is a type of injury that could flare up and get worse or get further aggravated. So that's just something to kind of monitor in terms of his workload. And like, he is carrying such a heavy workload on both sides of the ball that, and this is something he's been dealing with apparently since the end of last season, played through it with Team USA. So it has been a while. And obviously, like, before this injury against Detroit, we didn't even notice it, the first, 6 games of the season. So I think there's a scenario in which he's fine. It's just something on my radar now of he's dealing with this. He's been talking about how painful it's been. It seems to have gotten worse, or at least further aggravated in that Detroit game. And just a little bit of a red flag there.
Yeah, absolutely. Still no real update on Vano and Christian Wood, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
We're supposed to get a. I mean, we're we're at the 9-week mark for Christian Wood. We were supposed to get a update at the 8-week mark, so that isn't a great side. And then Vando, we should be getting an update early to mid of this upcoming week in terms of because they said another week or so they would have an update. So yeah, it's been slow, and the Lakers could use both of them.
Yeah. Decent slate of games coming up for them too, in terms of winnable ones. Like Memphis is down Ja and Desmond Bane. Play them Wednesday that's the opener of the NBA Cup for LA, I think. Memphis on Wednesday.
I think it's Friday against San Antonio. I could be wrong on that. I know Friday against San Antonio is an NBA Cup game. I don't remember if it's their opener.
Now, okay, this is not planned as well, but we kind of just touched on the Anthony Davis injury thing. They have a back-to-back with San Antonio and New Orleans Friday, Saturday. Is there any chance you think they do decide to rest AD on one of those games to help with the plantar fasciitis injury?
It's a good question. I haven't heard anything, but I would say I think it's a possibility, especially with New Orleans now being without Zion. That's a little bit of an easier game. At the same time, I think the Lakers are cognizant that they did not have a good road trip, and I think they want to start piling up some of the wins that they feel like they left on that trip. So I think it's ultimately going to come down to like a pain tolerance and workload thing. But I would not be surprised if he ends up having to be held out of that back-to-back.
All right. Start to wind down here a little bit. I do want to get your thoughts on JJ Redick through 9 games here. We talked about him, obviously, I think pretty extensively in the preseason. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think the sense from both of us was, we're cautiously optimistic, right? I think he killed every single media appearance, press conference possible. He walked out of our guy Trevor Lade's question in Memphis, which was fun. I didn't know it was him, actually. I just saw the clip like before we started. I didn't know it was him until I think Trevor did a video on it. I was like, wait, I didn't know that was you, because the video that got put out on Twitter kind of distorted the audio a little bit. But anyway, neither here nor there. What's kind of been your thoughts on JJ's coaching performance through the first 9 games of the season?
I think he's exceeded expectations. I think we talk about AD and the way that he's used him and the intentionality behind that. I think the offensive organization and structure has aligned with what he's talked about and what we saw in the preseason. I think he had the stones to bench D'Angelo Russell and not only bench him, but also call him out, because I think that, the Memphis game, the multiple,
it's a really bad segment
that preceded, because people were talking about the 2 direct possessions that preceded it. But if you actually go a possession before that, I think that defensive possession was even worse than either of the 2 following possessions. Like, he just gets blown by and gives this half-assed attempt to contest or to close out and stop a drive, and it was basically Matador defense allowing I forgot who the Grizzly was, but so that it was like that, then the Jay Huff thing, then the
back door
back, he doesn't peel out to the corner, and then gives up a 3-2 Huff, and you saw JJ's reaction of so JJ I think he's been again very clear with communication, and that was something that, going back to last season, and I'm pretty tired of continuing to compare, but because it's the same roster, it's easy to draw certain comparisons between last season and this season. But one thing that you heard consistently, and even from not hearing it from players and people within the team, you could just observe, was the changing of the starting lineup right before the game, or just night to night, the rotation vastly swinging, and a lot of these things, it's one thing to do some of these decisions, but it's also it depends on how it's communicated, and just the clarity and the explanation behind it. And from everything I've heard, JJ has been very direct. And if you have a question for him, he's not going to mince words, and he's going to tell you why he's reducing your role, or why he's promoting your role, or why he's changing this lineup or this. So a couple of examples, obviously, moving D'Angelo Russell to the bench, but also he shifted before that, he on the road trip, he shifted the Austin D'Lo minutes and sort of where they were within the rotation. So I think like examples like that have shown it. But the one thing to me that I've been the most impressed by was they stayed over in Toronto for 4 days, and they had a practice after the game. And we asked JJ a question about the 3-point shooting, and it was like, you wanted to increase the volume by 5-6 attempts, which would put you at around a top 10 team in terms of volume, and you guys are last in the league at that time in 3-point volume. And it was like how do you assess that? How do you feel about that? Are you trying to get them to take more threes? And JJ was essentially like, I'm paraphrasing here, you enter the season as a coach with a certain vision for your group, with a certain plan for your group, a certain ideology, and then the games start and your team hopefully does most of those things, but they also have their preferences, their playing style, kind of the way that they forge an identity, and then you have to adapt. And so yes, entering the season, I wanted us to take a certain amount of threes, but right now we're living in the paint. We're getting to the free throw line a lot. We're taking efficient shots. So I'm not going to, over analyze or sort of over tweak the offense to try and get it to fit my vision. I'm just, allowing it to play out. So I thought that level of just awareness and flexibility with his coaching style and his vision, that to me is the mark of a good coach, because we've seen it with like Greg Popovich. How many times did he remake his identity with the Spurs? And it really became more about personnel and league trends. Same thing with Eric Spoelstra in Miami. I think JJ has some of that of like, yes, I wanted to play a certain style, but I'm also adapting to how my team is performing. And if we're not going to take as many threes as I want, like, is that ideal? Maybe not, but I want to empower this group. And I think that's the right mindset to have. And that to me has been the most impressive thing.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that was kind of driving me crazy earlier on, especially in the preseason, was I feel like some of the guys were just shooting threes, just say, hey, we did it. We accomplished our goal. Like, respectfully, I didn't need to see Max Christie shoot pull-up threes in transition. I just never, ever needed to see that. And I don't think either. I don't think it's them turning down shots from three. I still think, like, when this team has looks that they are comfortable with, they're still taking them, which I think that is more important than the former, which kind of like we said, like, we're just getting shots up. JJ wants 45 threes. All right, let me get my 5 threes in for the night so we can help reach the goal. I will say this too, and you kind of touched on it. One, the communication, but more importantly, is like he said, the adaptability from JJ. One, you got to adapt to the players you have. Like, who knows? Who knows what the roster looks like next year? And maybe it's, go be the Boston Celtics on offense and shoot all the threes in the world. But this year we're going to play more, if you want to call it inside out, play more of a preference on getting to the paint, still living at the free throw line. One of the few things that I think has carried over from the previous regime. But they're a bad defense, do not get me wrong. But I do think, given the opportunity, JJ has more than I maybe even expected, shown the willingness to, okay, drop isn't working. This, they've killed us these past few possessions. All right, let's hedge, or all right, let's switch. And maybe even to a fault, but I do appreciate the willingness to not be ultra stubborn and like, no, it's going to be this, and if it doesn't work, it just doesn't work, and being willing to be adaptable. Because you do see time and time again, even from good coaches. Like, I think Mike Budenholzer is a really good coach, but he's got to be like amongst the 5 most stubborn coaches in the league. Ty Lue, even like Ty Lue is going to play small ball 5 with Nick Batum at some point. If it hasn't happened already, it's just going to happen. And seeing JJ being ultra willing to be adaptable, you combine them with the communication. I totally agree. He's absolutely surpassed expectations so far.
Yeah, no, I think that those are all, we're in agreement.
Yeah. Kind of last thing to wrap up here. is there anything that you've seen through these 9 games that's kind of changed your opinion one way or another about how you felt about this team heading into the season in terms of their like position in the league? So we kind of made the joke that, it's a 1.6% chance this team can win a title. Is there anything that you've seen through the first 9 games of the season that kind of sways that one way or another?
So it's tough because on the one hand, I think there's been things that have made me more optimistic, but on the other hand, there's been things that have made me less optimistic. So I think the defense has been like I was talking about. I think when we did our preview, I was saying I think they're probably going to be somewhere between like 15 and 20th on defense, like slightly below average. If there's any way that they could punch above their weight and be in slightly above league average defense, like that's when you're cooking. Because I thought offensively, top 10 offense, if not top 5, and
that was the floor
in
almost
in that mix so far. So I think they're 9th in offense now, but it slipped a little bit recently. I think they're gonna get that, especially if they get some regression. But the defense and the bench have lowered my expectations a little bit. And just overall, like the depth of the roster, I think some of the concerns that people, I think skeptics, external skeptics looking at the Lakers, like a common thing when I would do other podcasts or like non-Lakers people, it would just be, well, this team has no depth. And like, yeah, that's a good starting lineup, but I don't trust Gabe Vincent. I don't trust Max Christie. I don't trust Christian Wood. A lot of people don't trust Jared Vanderbilt. And like just going down the list, and it's like, those people, it's been more toward their argument, I guess, than mine of like, I thought the Lakers had a solid 9-man rotation. We'll see. We'll see how that plays out. Optimistically, though, like if AD is going to be at this level, one quick thing to add to the pessimism. I think LeBron has been good and even very good at times. I don't think he's been great overall. I think we've seen a little bit of slippage with his finishing at the rim, and he's been a bit more jump shot and 3-point reliant. Now, LeBron tends to do this to start seasons. If you look at his month-by-month splits, he always starts the season a little bit more jump shot heavy, a little bit more pass heavy, and then he starts to ramp up into form. He's talked about kind of treating the season like a marathon and sort of trying to peak at the right time going into the playoffs. So for now, I'm not going to really dock that, but like, I don't think he's been quite at the level he was at last season, and sort of the level that the Lakers probably need him to be at to win a title, because it's probably going to be largely like LeBron and AD. Like the supporting cast is obviously good, but LeBron and AD are great and just at a level where they're the best duo in basketball, and JJ's cooking with his schemes, and that combination leads to LA somehow beating the odds and winning. But from an optimism standpoint, it's just been Anthony Davis, and it's like AD's been, to me, he should be a top 3 guy on people's MVP ballots right now. It's probably him, Tatum, and KD in some order, and he's been a top 5, if not top 3 player this season, and really is, again, as I said earlier, has had this extended stretch of playing at this level. I just think now it's been an intentionality behind it and the different ways they're using him. So I think if you have a player playing at that level, you have a shot against just about anybody. We've seen this team rise to the level of their opponent in the NBA Cup, in the playoffs, in the play-in. Like, this is a team that when you give them you need to win this game, they have a really good shot in those games. So I think like that the AD, Austin's looked good. Austin is having a career year.
Yep.
Rui had a really good start. He's tailed off a bit, but if he can kind of get back to playing the way he was the first few games, like, that starting lineup's really good. I like D'Lo as a 6th man. I think JJ's done well. So there's a lot to like, and maybe that percentage that we talked about is nudged up to 2%, 2.5%. But I would say, like, certainly after the first few games, I nudged it up like 3-4%, and then it's come back down because the defense, the attention to detail, the depth, all those things. Like, this is a team that can coast sometimes, and that's something that's a little bit of a red flag for me of like, I think their margin for error is non-existent. They have to bring 100% effort or close to it every single night. if they're having these 70-80% effort nights, they're going to get ran off the floor. So that would be my kind of, I guess, analysis of the first 9 games is about as expected. Like, given it was a tough schedule and they didn't get to 5-4. I had them going 6-4 over the first 10. I think they will go 6-4. I think they'll beat Toronto. So I think they're largely in line with my expectations. And just like the journey to getting to 6-4 has not been, I think, what a lot of us expected.
All right. So last thing, then we'll get you out of here, Jovan. Really appreciate your time. Which one of these 3 things do you think the Lakers need the most? All right. So we're talking trade here. Option 1 is a real, like a more consistent backup big, I suppose. Option 2 is another wing. And option 3 is a third star. So let's put a name to each of these. So Zach LaVine, third star, Cam Johnson, wing, and I don't even know which, Walker Kessler, I guess. I don't even know which big is like realistic at this point.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say for the specific examples you just used in terms of players, I would go Kessler, Johnson, LaVine.
Okay.
I think in general, I've been more of they need another wing. So I guess if I'm going positional archetypes, I would go wing. And to me, that could either be like a Rui replacement that moves Rui to the bench, although he's been playing well. We see the ups and downs with Rui sometimes. And for me, it's like if he's playing the way he was the first 2 games, that guy's a locked-in starter, in 32 to 35 minutes a night. The Rui of the last few games is more of to me, a fringe starter and more of like a high-end bench player fringe starter. So I want to see. I think the Lakers are going to be patient here on the trade market. So I want to see how Rui materializes throughout the season. But in general, I would say either a big wing to be that third front court starter, or now that there's an opening there in the backcourt, an athletic, defensive-minded guard type, a Alex Caruso, DeAnthony Melton, Jalen Suggs type. Obviously, those guys are. I don't think any of them are realistic to get. And but like that type of player, and I'm sorry to use the AC words, but then second I would say is a backup big, and then third is a third star, because I think I get the appeal of a third star, but even like Zach LaVine, I've been against Zach LaVine trade for the entirety of it being a thing, just because, especially looking at the contracts, you're gonna have to send out D'Lo, Gabe,
everybody,
and then Rui or Van. Like, you're gonna have to send out
that's
3
the
of
trade.
your 4 guys, and then they probably don't. You probably get to keep your pick, so that's like a positive. But I don't. If we're talking about depth and defense being the Lakers' 2 biggest concerns so far, Zach LaVine does not improve either one of those. The depth gets worse, regardless of what you think about D'Lo or Gabe or whoever, and the defense gets worse. So, especially if it's like Vando and Gabe, you're trading 2 of your 3 or 4 best perimeter defenders. So that to me is where I would say the third star, if it was Donovan Mitchell or like a no-brainer third star, of course, maybe that guy vaults to the top, but I don't see that guy becoming a bit like Giannis. Sure, like, but I don't see that happening. So I would personally do it wing, big, star. And again, wing could be a small wing or a big wing, but shooting guard up to like a 3.5, backup big. And then, but with the specific example, like I really like Walker Kessler. I think that's if you could do JHS and a first for Walker Kessler, I think that's a no-brainer for the Lakers. Like, go do that.
Do that yesterday,
but
please
do that yesterday. And I, but yeah, I think that's my general. What about you?
I've really loved the idea of getting Cam Johnson. He's been balling so far this season for a frisky, fun Nets team. I would probably lean the same order as you: wing, big, and third star. I'm still, especially if you're making a deal like tomorrow, for example, right? Because I'm still going to hold out 1% of hope that Christian Wood comes back. It kind of solidifies that backup big spot for you, at the very least, as a guy that can play next to AD fairly consistently. And the third star, I do understand the point with LaVine and using him as the example. I do think that there's a little bit more appeal for a LaVine that I think sometimes does get credit for. Obviously, the defense and your depth doesn't get any better. Although one, I think that would just be the ultra. We're just going to lean into having the best 5-man group in the league. That would be the vision, I suppose. And I think the third clear-cut weakness for this team, which again is kind of funny, how I think all three of these weaknesses, if you told me them back in July, I would have said, yeah, that's about right. The third one is athleticism, specifically from your other your backcourt in particular. Like Austin's great, D'Lo's a really good player, but not having that real athleticism does at times really hurt this team. And I think Levine does give you a big boost in that regard, putting some real functional athleticism in the backcourt, because LeBron, and I had the tweet about Braun that, I mean, he immediately made me look like an idiot when he had that insane second half. I want to say it was against Sacramento. But LeBron is still probably the second most athletic player on this team at 40, and that's, I think, problematic. When you're saying, hey, look, can you go? We're facing a team with elite perimeter. We're facing the Oklahoma City Thunder. Do we really want to watch D'Lo have to like create space against Ludor, AC, Shea, J-Dub, K-Sip? Like, no, that's going to be problematic. Even Austin a little bit. But throwing in that athletic juice in the guard room, I think could be really valuable. And like I said, it would just be leaning into we're gonna have the best 5-man group in the league. We're gonna be an elite offense, and God forbid we like miss shots, because if we miss shots, it's gonna be a long night. But yeah, I still agree with the order, but I'm gonna give a little bit more credit to Levine, I think, specifically using that example.
I would also say though, I have a little bit of a concern with a Zach LaVine, Austin Reeves backcourt. Like, I almost feel like at that point,
is Austin the backup at that point?
That's the thing. It's like, are you moving Austin to a 6-man role, or are you now shopping Austin and you're just like really remaking this entire rotation? Because I think while LaVine is I would say he's clearly he's bigger and more athletic than D'Lo. I think he's a better defender than D'Lo. I still think you run into similar problems where it's like part of Austin's success this season is the Lakers made a conscious decision of, you're the number 3 guy, and in terms of ball handling, you're the number 2 guy, and even sometimes the number 1 guy. And if you bring in Levine, I think he moves ahead of Austin in the pecking order, and then Austin goes back to the role he had more last season, which he can thrive in, and I still think he was effective last season. But I just wonder if then you got to split up that backcourt, and now all of a sudden, well, you don't have, hypothetically, you don't have D'Lo and Gabe Vincent, so you don't even really have a point guard on your roster anyway. So maybe you have to do a separate move to bring in that type of player. Maybe you could get someone from Chicago in that deal, but then you also have to expand it because Lakers can't take back more money in the deal because of the first apron. So I think a Zach LaVine deal, I'm still against it, but if that's the route they go, that's the route they go, and I will analyze it. I'll come back on here and we'll talk about it. But I think it's more to me just like the depth aspect of it. Of even if you say Gabe Vincent's a minus, so it's really like D'Lo plus Rui or D'Lo plus Vando. That's still a pretty big depth hit, in my opinion, to a group that we're talking about, like sometimes struggling to even get like 6 productive guys on a given night. Now all of a sudden you're taking out a couple of them.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for us here today, Jovan. Thank you so much, my friend, for hopping on. And I'm sure we'll talk more Lakers here soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, make sure you guys go check out all of Jovan's great stuff for The Athletic and the Jovan Buha podcast. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Stay safe and peace out.